And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Journey into Self-Healing. I am your host, Dr. Charlie Trin, and I'm really happy today for today's topic, which will be about the genders, right? The power of the genders. And so, what's really exciting about this is we're actually taking the concept of yin yang that we described and talked about last week, where we really broke down how in traditional Eastern medicine, this whole concept of yin yang were interrelating through our reality and how it was the foundation of everything. So, I'm going to go a little bit further into that, but really go into this idea of the genders and how the fluidity of gender is actually already inherent in this basic foundation. And so there's something called the I Ching. It's called the Book of Changes. Beautiful concept where it creates these red, well, it's not usually red lines, but it's really what's called unbroken lines. And there's 6 of them here, as you can see, and it represents yang energy. And then here you have these 6 broken lines here, which are considered yin. And so if you look at this circle here, they actually represent what we call 2 to the power of 6, which is the binary code of yang and yin, but it's actually broken down into 6 lines, okay? And so when you actually do 6 lines of binary code, you actually get 64 gates, all right? And some of you guys, if you guys grew up in the early computer age, we used to have things called, actually video games too. We had something called 64-bit video games. We also had 24-bit, but 64-bit was a very important concept for computers. And you can see here in the Book of Changes that even in the traditional Eastern medicine, we were actually already using the concept of yin-yang to explain our entire reality and how maybe our reality is a giant computer and it's running off of this yin-yang energy. And so this 64 gate is so important because it actually shows up in many different systems that we have today. So let's have a small overview about the idea of the masculine energy. And so here we have these 3 not broken lines that represents heaven. And this is kind of represents even in esoteric concept like Father Sky, right? And then here we see the element of fire and how it's represented into actually 2 solid lines of yang, but it also has 1 yin line here in the middle. And then the element of wind has these 2 yang element, but it also has 1 yin element, right? So you can see that fire is still considered yang, but yet there's this yin element that's still there that doesn't make it fully yang, but it has kind of like this balance of yin-yang within, but it still expresses itself as this yang energy. Okay? So the masculine yang energy is usually characterized by this active, assertive, and outward-focused nature, right? We see this very powerful expression to connect with the fire and the wind in the masculine energy. And so fire represents passion, creativity, and transformation, the drive to move forward and to actually change, right? You see that in fire. And then the wind represents this element of the intellect, communication, and movement, right? It enhances this energy by spreading ideas, fostering innovation, and facilitating rapid progress. So together, when the element mix together, they create this fiery and airy intellect, right? That creates a potent force for initiating new ventures, inspiring action, and propelling growth, right? So this is kind of why this beautiful element of yang energy is all about the spiritual energy kind of pursuing ambitious goals. And we see that in a lot of the masculine energy today in our social construct. You see here the kind of this wise man working with the elements of light or fire, right? And then it's kind of like this almost ethereal feeling of the wind. And then we have the energy of the feminine yin. And this is kind of shown into the earth element here, right? Representing Mother Earth. And here you can see it's 3 broken yin line, right? So fully yin is considered earth element. And it represents the earth as in soil. It's not just representing earth as in the planet because earth also has water, which is also the same element of yin. Now in describing the concept of a mountain, you can see that it's 2 broken yin line and then 1 unbroken line of yang, right? So here it's also like the expression of yin, but it still has a little bit of that yang energy in it. And water represents this bookend of yin and then having yang in the middle, which if you see and pay attention, it looks exactly the opposite of the fire element on the other side, where it was two yang lines and one yin line inside of it, right? So you can see that already there is a way to describe the element that we see in everyday life. Kind of like in computer code, right? So I used to write computer, I used to program with games, and so for me this is actually a really beautiful way of expressing our reality, because maybe now I'm a programmer in this reality rather than programming virtual games. So anyways, let's go back to the yin energy. So yin is a receptive, nurturing, and inward-focused quality, and it beautifully harmonizes the idea of earth and water, which we see on the planet Earth. She embodies stability, practicality, and nourishment, and she provides a solid foundation and a sense of groundedness. So water symbolizes the element of emotions, intuition, and that adaptability that flows gently to nourish and sustain life. While together with the presence of earth, it creates fluidity of water that creates nurturing environment that fosters growth, healing, and deep emotional connections. So you can see how the yin element is really all about cultivating this inner peace and stability, right? And so what's really beautiful is you can see here in the whole half yin, half yang. And so imagine these 6 lines having different combinations of the element. And in that concept, it represents actually very similarly to the 64 codons in DNA. So here's the I Ching here. And then actually, here's what it looks like when you work with computer code. So when you have a 1 bit, you're really only working with the binary yin and yang. When you have 2 bits, you're now working with 2 lines, right? Whether it's yin yin or yang yang. You get to the 4 bit, and you can see it's actually 4 numbers, right? So it's like the idea of 4 lines in the I Ching. So when we get to the 6 bit, it's actually 6 lines of code represented by this binary code. So if you look at DNA here, you kind of have this combo of GCUA or GACUA. Well, it's been a while since I worked with genetics, but you can see that actually codons are broken into trip numbers, like how we have here three yang lines and 3 yin lines, right? And so these combos then join up with another 3 trip codons to create this whole 64 concept of codons, 6 groups of amino acids, right? So you can see how already yin-yang was such a ancient concept that was the foundation of our reality, and yet today, even in our own genetic reality, we have this DNA that expresses our masculine, feminine energy in this variety of code. And in computers, the entire virtual reality concept and games is written by the binary zeros and ones, or as we would say, yin-yang. So there's really beautiful systems out there that actually brings all these concepts together to show that there is a representation of who we are as a soul embodying to physical reality. So astrology is kind of what I've worked with for a while, but actually I've looked into human design because I'm also looking into I Ching, and man, it's a marvelous system, right? So here is the concept of the human design, where it takes the astrological wheels of the 12 zodiacs. It then puts a 64 hexagram of the I Ching outside, and then it uses the Kabbalah tree with the 36 channels inside of the human body, and then just for good measure, it throws it into a chakra system, right? So it represents a root, the solar plexus, the heart, the throat, and the rest of the chakras. So this is kind of like a really beautiful way of showing how all these different modalities of what we call divination in the West, in the East, in the Middle East, in the North, in the South, everywhere, and how if you put them together, they're able to describe the conjunction of spirit, of body, and mind within the human soul, right? I like to think that soul is the encasement of the body, the mind, and the spirit, right? Because spirit is really everything. Spirit is not individualized like a soul is individualized. And then the most modern, and I say that modern because it's only 20 years old, but it's a lot of us haven't heard of this. It's called the gene keys, and you can see here the gene keys uses the same 64 hexagram of the I Ching here in this circle. And then you have these numbers here, 53, 54, 32, 42. These are actually I Ching gates. So it's gate 53. Don't worry about the decimal. That's a whole other concept that is not used here. But the idea that the 64 I Ching gates still represents the concept of really genetics, but it's also the representation of physical reality. And so in the gene keys, it's a way to express who we are as genetic expressions of ourselves. And so it uses the 64 codons of the I Ching. I mean, it's really brilliant because I've used this in so many places where I've spoken with people who I've never met before, and just looking at their code, I'm able to get an overview of the themes that they're experiencing in physical reality. And sometimes you're able to kind of glance at some of their past lives that are really explaining why they are going through what they're going through today. And so I want to now take it further to a little bit more of an esoteric concept because the I Ching really represents the physical reality. But here in astrology, there is a concept of the physical reality because we talk about medical astrology and how we can actually take your natal chart and match it up to what is happening to you physically, right? So that's kind of like the medical astrology. But I wanted to kind of show that because astrology represents more of a Western concept of explaining our reality, I wanted to show how actually a lot of us are not hearing the whole story of astrology. A lot of people think, oh, I'm a sun sign. I was born, during this 30-day window, and so everybody born during this 30-day window are just like me, which is totally false. Actually, there's so much more to that, right? Because actually, when we do astrology, we need to know your exact time of birth because that sets your entire chart every 2 hours, right? And so it's very important that we know exactly when you're born because it sets your whole astrology rather than right now what we tend to have is stereotypes of astrology, right? So what's also a bad stereotype is that sun astrology actually much more correlate with the masculine energy of reality, right? And the reason why we say this is because the sun energy tends to be this radiating expression of movement. It's conscious, it's actively trying to pursue something, it's trying to do something. And plus the sun is like this giant fireball, right? Or gas energy in the sky. And so it's very much this fiery energy. Yet the moon is what we see at night, and she shows up actually in this whole 28-day cycle that we see based on her reflecting the sun. And so actually I would kind of say that if you have a physical body of a woman or a man, your elements actually would tweak more closely to your physical expression. And so for women should be looking at their moon element, right? So the moon in astrology tends to have so much more of an impact of who they are compared to the expression of the sun element. And this is again where I feel like our current society likes to focus only on one gender rather than the holistic of the genders, right? And so what happens then, we get kind of lost where a lot of women might look at their chart and connect more to the sun energy, but actually maybe it's not their sun energy, but rather it's the elements that they are connected to. And so I want to go back now to this idea of going back to the fire and wind for the masculine elements. And so here you have Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius representing the fire element. And then you have Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius representing the air or wind element. Okay, it represents more of that communication, talking element. And then here we have Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, which represents the earth element, right? That stability that you stand on. And then really all the plants and fruits come from the earth. And then, which is bearing fruits, right? I mean, anyways. And then you have the water element, which is described through in Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So what happens is if those elements of earth and water are connected to the moon, then by saying, yes, I connect to my moon better as a woman, we'll be more in line. However, that is not how astrology works. Actually, astrology is this beautiful mix and matching of energies to allow the variety of souls. And so what we get is sometimes you have a sun sign that is in the element of earth, just like me. I have Virgo in my earth element. I have my sun in Virgo, the earth element. And so what happens is my outward expression of the sun element of my conscious energy tends to have more of an introverted earth tone to it. And so a lot of people who get to know me tend to say, hey, you know, I'm not as loud and talkative as maybe other signs who were maybe a sun sign in fire or a sun sign in air. And so because of that, I could easily have grown up and say, hey, maybe I have this feminine energy because my sun sign is in the earth element, right? Even though I haven't looked at my moon sign, which is ironic because my moon sign is in the fire element. And so what happens is when I do have my emotional tendencies, they tend to have more of a masculine spin to it, right? And so really what's interesting is I may be physically masculine, a male, but I have kind of these variety in my personalities, right? So where I'm really active and try to live my life in the world, in being out there, I tend to have more of a very logical, very pragmatic, and very cautious element. But maybe my emotions tend to be not so like I'm gonna stay at home and like just deal with my stuff, but maybe that fiery element of my moon makes me want to go hang out with friends at night and have a deeper conversation and talk to my friends, right? Because a lot of people tell me I tend to have this introverted, extroverted energy, which we've all heard today. Now people call it ambivert. You're like both, and this is again probably showing up in this idea that maybe your sun and moon tend to have a different gender twist to it, right? But I'm still a masculine man physically, right? But it does what this is really beautiful is that it allows me as a man to then have variety of my masculine feminine personality when I'm next to another man, right? So we talked about this last time where yang and yin is this relative code. So next to like five guys, with my astrology, I will probably be more of the yin side of most men, right? If a man tends to have all these fiery and air energy, next to him, I'm probably going to be this yin element compared to them, right? But it doesn't mean I'm a woman. It doesn't mean I have chosen to then, if he's more masculine than me, I'm just going to go to the feminine side. You know, it doesn't mean that. It actually means that in the physical body of the masculine, I get to experience a variety of this feminine masculine energy within me, right? So so what you'll learn is everybody in everybody's chart has both the sun and the moon. That means that we have these natural tendencies to have both the masculine and feminine energy, right? Because if we were just one, it would be so unbalanced because my sun sign allows me to act out in the world in public, you know, being around people, versus my moon sign makes me be more self-reflective, right? Everybody has that. Everybody has ability to speak up in public, and everybody has ability to stay at home and self-reflect what's going on in their life. Everybody has those abilities, and that kind of what shows up with the masculine, feminine, even in physical form. And so really the reason I really wanted to have this deeper discussion is I find myself, and many of us probably notice this, is there is a huge separation between the masculine energy and the feminine energy, to the point where now what happens, you get this group of feminine attacking the masculine and vice versa, the masculine attacking the feminine. But yet within our own construct, men are attacking each other, women are attacking each other, because there's almost this lack of appreciating that there's some women that are way more masculine energy than some of the other women, and it's vice versa. There's some men that are way more feminine than their counterpart masculine, but doesn't mean that they are any less masculine or feminine, right? It's their soul wanting to experience different variety of this yin yang element that creates a foundation. Remember, we have 64 gates. 64 ways to represent yin and yang. So today when people say there are 72 genders, I'm like, it's closer to 64 genders, but it only goes back to there's still only two, right? The masculine and feminine, because really the masculine and feminine, when you go together, creates the babies, right? As much as we like to say that two women can have babies, it requires science still. So if you don't have science, it's impossible for two women to be able to have a child and two men to have a child, right? Because it's this polarity of masculine and feminine that comes together to create life. And that's very important for us to not get confused, because when we use science to explain anything, science is only less than 200 years old. Maybe you could argue it's from the Renaissance days, right? However, our ancient tradition didn't need science to explain that we understood how to make babies without a third party involved in making babies. Okay, that's a different conversation. And so why is there a separation? It's super interesting, and I want all of us to kind of start thinking about that, because maybe thinking about separation will actually help us understand actually why we need each other. And so some of the questions that we should be asking ourselves more deeply is, are we bound to repeat the struggles of our parents that have what they have experienced? Some of our parents, my family is an Asian American family, and there's stereotypes of what men and women do, right? Strong stereotypes. Yet, am I going to be, because I might have some feminine qualities in a man, be stuck not being able to understand the differences that my father and my mother experience in their growing up in Asia, right? Am I bound to repeat that? Or do I have an opportunity to change that? Because I am different from my parents, right? Genetically speaking, the whole idea is we are a combination of our parents. And what would it take to heal ourselves from actually not having a parent there, right? So let's say I had a missing, actually growing up, I did have my parents separated. So I lived with my father or my mother, and I took different turns living with them. And so what was really difficult is, and already my parents, my mother is a fiery sign, so she tends to have much more masculine, ambitious energy compared to my father, who is a Taurus energy, who tends to have much more of he would rather just sit in the yard and work in the yard all day long and not deal with people, right? So it's a very different energy that I experienced growing up. And then finally, can we heal our inner masculine feminine so that we can find partners that are also healed? Am I going to now be stuck, not be able to heal my feminine side with my mother, my masculine side with my father, and then meet another woman who has some of these issues with growing up, and now we're going to be broken forever, right? And I think these are deeper conversation, because I feel like all of these can be changed if we understand who we are and if we're willing to have, again, this deeper journey of self-healing. And so finally, I would just say, let's really kind of connect into the masculine and feminine within each of us. Just because I may be physically masculine doesn't mean I don't have elements of the feminine energy, as well as I may have very strong element of masculine, but it doesn't mean because I'm physically masculine that I have to actually represent just the masculine energy, right? And vice versa. I think what's really important for women too is actually being able to step up, but not having to yell that they are here, right? It's almost like in their quiet, in being able to sit there and being able to be who they are, we're able to recognize them, versus like, oh, we need women to yell at the top of their lungs and tell us they're there. But that's a masculine quality, y'all, right? So some of the women are able to, and you see them, they tend to be the CEOs of some companies, right? Where they have very driven energy and they show up in the workforce. However, they're great fathers that should be at home taking care of the kids, who should be at home nursing, right? I've noticed a lot of male nurses actually have a lot of these water or earthy elements to their charts. And so what I like to say is our ancestors have passed down their lessons and their wisdom literally in our genetics. We saw this, the 64 codons, the I Ching, computer code represents the fact that genetic information and wisdom and information is being passed on physically to us, right? So I would say let us kind of rethink this idea that science has been rewriting our history, right? Rewriting who we are, because really our family, our legacies have left power within our genetic code, right? And that's why I love this idea of astrology, human design, gene keys. I don't believe one is better than the other. It's like saying which language you want to speak. Well, which language do you speak? And that's the language I will communicate with, right? And so this idea that there's so many ways to describe the beauty and power behind the connection of the masculine and feminine is so beautiful, that I feel like today we need to start finding that inner balance between the masculine and feminine, and stop creating all this excess noise around the masculine and feminine. I think this whole concept of the 64 genders is a huge confusion, because, or 72, whatever, it could go up to 1,000. I don't even know where the genders are right now. But literally, by creating genders, you're creating another label, which is ironic, because when you said you didn't want to be binary, you created a label to not fit in the binary code of reality. So this is not any judgment on anyone. I think it's really important that if we're able to tune into both the masculine and feminine within us and feel sacred in the body that we are born in, because this is literally the entire ancestral lineage of like library code in our genetics, right? These codons have been passed on. So I really hope that all of us have an opportunity to go deeply into thinking about how this can help us connect more into who we are and be able to connect more into even our own family, right? To be able to have the relationship of male, female, or even just male, male, but just the idea that there is this energy of the masculine and feminine that creates the structure of family. So I hope that all of you guys have an opportunity to think about this, share what you guys feel about gender, and really have a deeper conversation with ourselves. Let us accept who we are rather than relabel ourselves. I think it's much easier if we really started to tune into who we are rather than trying to create new labels for who we are. And finally, healing ourselves, either alone or in community, gives us the courage to send healing to our ancestors as well as our descendants, right? So let us bring balance back to the masculine and feminine. So thank you for watching this episode. I hope you subscribe. If you haven't already subscribed, please like some thumbs up so more people can watch this. And if someone is having a deeper hard time with their element of masculine feminine, please send them this episode. Or I would really say go into astrology, go into human design, understand how your own code has natural tendencies for either the masculine and feminine, or really some people have really beautiful balance between the two, and they should never be shamed for being that, because those are the people that are going to bridge between the genders. So anyways, thank you all for joining me, and I'm excited to be creating more episodes every week. So I'll see y'all next time.